Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. And today we have got a real treat for you because this lady, if anybody knows their onions, right, this is the one. So Debbie Riley from the Centre for Adoption Support and Education. Thank you. Welcome to the show. Really looking forward to getting stuck into this with you.
Thank you, Simon. I'm really honored to be here, to be able to have this conversation with you and to lend some insights to our listeners around this interesting time and the development of a teen.
Yeah. So yes. So as well as being the CEO and co-founder of C.A.S.E, Debbie is also an adopted mum. Her book that which we're going to kind of be exploring is dedicated. It touched me because it's dedicated to her son, Sean, right? So Debbie's been telling me that her son is 31 and is getting married this year. So one proud mom, right?
Very proud, yes, very proud. And a proud dad along with it.
Yeah. So the book is called Beneath the Mask, Understanding Adopted Teens. And the first question I had really was to what extent was this inspired by Sean, the fact that you chose to write about teens, or and to what extent was it inspired by your work at C.A.S.E? And I may be making a completely a distinction here that can't be made. So if I'm off, please.
Well, there's probably two prongs to that. Certainly, the book came out of the work here at C.A.S.E when we first decided to open our doors and provide very specialized mental health supports and other supports to adoptive families. We began to see oversurgence of teens that were coming through the doors with their being sort of dragged by their parents. And my background is I'm a marriage and family therapist of almost 40 years and have specialized in treating teens. And when, as you shared, I am an adoptive mom, when my husband and I chose to build our family through adoption, I began to read a lot about some of the complexities that were inherent in adoption, and particularly for those children that were coming from our foster care system here in the United States, and was aware of all the challenges and the poor outcome. So long story short, we began seeing lots of teens, and I began to think about how the issues of adoption further complicated and compromised this significant developmental time in one person's life, which is adolescence. And so I felt like there was something to be shared, particularly with parents, about these challenges, and also professionals. I think there wasn't a whole lot being written about this at the time. And so I decided to embark upon this journey of putting together our experiences, my experiences here at C.A.S.E. Where Sean comes in is, I hoped that the knowledge that was set forth in this book would somehow help his journey as an adoptee along the way.
Yeah. So, we talked about complexities, and I think when you said the phrase, the title of the book, Beneath the Mask, we're talking about underneath it, what's been, beneath it, and I also often think that we're talking about levels of complexity. So the levels of complexity that we look at adoption. So you've got the what some people refer to as the primal wound, the idea, the complexity due to relinquishment. You've got the complexity of the things that kids have been through before they're adopted, if they're adopted out of foster care. You've got the kind of the interracial complexity as well, and then there's also there's different like international. So you might be white kid adopted by white parents, but Russian and American, or Ukrainian American, obviously quite certainly to the point. Got different levels of complexity, and the more levels of complexity, the tougher it is from an outside perspective. That's how I'd see it.
Yeah, well, what I began to tease through was that there were some areas, and I call them the 6 stuck spots that I write about, where a majority of the teens that I was treating myself and my colleagues here as well at C.A.S.E, they were sort of thematic, like they were pretty consistent that I was seeing throughout this journey and helping, as you pointed out, many of those complexities. And so I kind of framed it as where kids get stuck during adolescence as they navigate their adoption journey, and at the same time work through what I see as probably one of the most challenging developmental stages of our life, which is adolescence.
Yeah. So what naive questions, what is the mask?
So the mask actually came from, teenagers can either be very engaging, or they can be quite withholding and sort of non-compliant therapeutically, so to speak. So they're not happy to be here all the time. And just one day I was just trying to engage a adolescent as best as I could to begin to talk about some of the issues that I thought was, impacting them, and decided to use some expressive therapies, which I'm trained in as a therapist, and thought of the idea of a mask, because I think that there are many layers, as I said, to this task of adolescence for adoptees. And often I think the teens are hiding behind different layers of their identity. And so I gave a young person the opportunity to create a mask, and he did, and left it here. And every time another adolescent came in, they saw the mask and they wanted to do one. So over time, it became a therapeutic tool that I used with teens in helping them to really work through their identity, really their identity exploration. And so I know the viewers can't see, but I'm showing Simon one wall of a lot of masks. So I decided to then, title the book Beneath the Mask, because there's a lot under the mask.
Yeah. So what Debbie's showing me are actually 3-dimensional, beautifully produced masks. And it's a bit kind of spooky, because today I've been helping my mum sell my dad's kiln. So my mum's downsizing, and my father died 5 years ago. So the kiln that he never used, because he spent all this time sculpting and never got around to the pottery, it now needs removing. So I'm thinking, my head's full of sculpting at the moment. What are they actually made of, these 3D masks? They look great.
They're preformed, for the audience listening, like a preformed mask that one would typically see. And what I do is just engage the teen with the opportunity to create a mask as the world sees them, things that they don't want the world to see, things that they wish the world would see about them, or just something that would signify their identity. So they're very different. They have many layers of complexity, and oftentimes we'll do several masks over the journey of our work together.
Yeah. So these are blank, and then
They're blank.
the adoptees, or the teens colour them in to reflect what they want to say. So yeah, as you say, that's what you meant by expressive therapy.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of identity is one of that fascinates me. Absolutely fascinated. I actually did a podcast on sorry, not a podcast. I did a webinar on identity last month, because as I held my what is loosely called original birth certificate in my hand about 6 years ago, it was not a lot better than a piece of toilet paper, really, but it had my original name on. So it said David Anthony Flower on it, not Simon Jonathan Ben, and it had my birth mother's name on it too. And I had this idea popped into my head, and it's a one that I've never had before. If I've had two names, right, then I can't actually be either of those. I can't, because the truth never changes, whereas my name has changed. And also thought that, well, and then the next thought that came into my head was, well, a lot of people come into this world, whether they're adopted or not adopted, and they don't have a name. So, when we have these things called, identity, well, you have them in the States. We use kind of like, we don't have them here in the UK. We've got we have a driving license, which kind of serves as an identity card. You have ID, I think, and that's got our name on it. And that's, if identity isn't our name, then what on earth is identity? So, what does identity mean to you, Debbie?
Well, it's made up of so many parts. It's made up your physical characteristics, your intellectual capabilities, your sexual orientation, your self-image. I think I said your physical characteristics, your personality. It is so complex. I mean, I think that's what makes this time of development so fascinating to me. And it's interesting when you speak about, a name or having two names. How I see this identity work with adoptees is, when we start from the origin, is our children you have two sets of parents, either known or unknown, but you have the biological family and you have the adoptive family. And the journey is really how do you integrate those pieces into formulating your identity, whether it is, I have two names, I have two birth countries, I have, two families. Where do I get certain characteristics from? My birth family, my adoptive family. How do I put all this together to figure out who I am? And, one very spot on young man said to me once, he said, it's really hard. It's like asking somebody to run without legs. You can't do it, meaning I don't have a lot of information. I mean, that's the other complexity here. I don't have a lot of information in which I can build my identity. So a lot of the kids that we work with here might come in with very little information about their, birth origin, no information about their biological family because of the underpinnings of their story, whether it was a young little girl left in a cornfield in China, or a young person that I worked with for a long time, who's, when she was moments old, was put in a dumpster behind a store, left to die, and somebody found her. So she had no underpinnings of her beginnings, yet she had to figure out who she was.
Wow. Yeah. expressed like that, I mean, it is, first off, incredible. I mean, the dumpster story is incredibly, an incredibly painful one to hear. And also, there is, looking at it like that, it is incredibly complex. My own view on identity is absolutely nothing like that at all. And I don't know, well, I kind of know why, because of some of the stuff that I'm listening to. But what helps, I think the key word that you used there, Debbie, was integration. Mm. So what helps? What helps that integration process happen? And you know, often I would start the conversation with a guest by saying, you know, what do you understand by the term thriving adoptees? What comes to your mind, and what helps that happen? What helps adoptees thrive? And I guess another way of asking that question would be, what helps adoptees on that journey,
well, I think
integration?
Yeah, I think the first step is really a deep understanding of their story, of their narrative, of how they came to adoption, how they came to this family, where they came from. It's really their adoption story. And it's fascinating because the story evolves over time for an adoptee. You know, and often early in their childhood, it's told in a very simplistic way of how they came into adoption. But as they get older, they're aware that there's more to the story than, you know, however it goes. Often it's your birth mother couldn't take care of you and we wanted a family and so we adopted you. That's a very basic story. But by the time you're in pre-adolescence and adolescence, the brain evolves to a point where they can manipulate things much more abstractly, and they know that there's more to the story. And this is really where we go more deeply with the family and helping to share the nuances of their child's story so that they can begin to understand what were the reasons behind whether it was, you know, the relinquishment, so to speak. You know, was it a choice? Was the child taken from a family because of not good things happening? But that's really the first step. And, you know, that's one of our stuck spots, is a lot of kids come in because they really want to understand the why. It's very hard for children to think about how can a mother and father not raise you? How can they harm you to the point where someone has to take you away from them? I mean, that is just, it's counterintuitive that parents are supposed to protect and love, right? So that's the first stuck spot, is really trying to help them understand the reason. And as we evolve into the narrative, often where we land is to another stuck spot. And that's, sometimes there's a wealth of information that a parent can share. And sometimes, in those two examples earlier, there's no information. So, you know, that's quite overwhelming for, you know, an adoptee.
Yeah. So to me, there's two things that occur to me, that what you're talking about there is a kind of like an intellectual understanding, like an understanding, a rationalization, answering of questions, something that happens kind of in the brain to me, rather than something that is a kind of like a felt experience of wholeness, a seeing ourselves as adoptees as lovable. Seeing that there's a difference. There's a difference between head and heart that comes to my mind as you say that stuff, and that's just how I see it. So how would you see that head and heart stuff? Because surely we need both, but
I think it's both. I think on probably the first level, it's the heart. I think that the children, the teens internally feel very conflicted. Some are very sad. Some feel very wounded. It sort of goes to the heart of, why was I given away? What was wrong with me? That led to this happening. If I was abused, what does that mean about me? Whatever the reason is, it inflicts the heart. And then the intellect is trying to figure out, all the complexities of this. I mean, that's a lot. We're here sitting and listening as adults and trying to make sense of this. Isn't Simon, this is what you do, and all of your podcasts is really helping to expand the knowledge around these issues. But imagine what it's like for a child, and some teens are still children, they're growing and evolving to really navigate all these complexities, all these questions on your own. Because sometimes parents aren't talking about this with their children. That's the other piece here, is that, we want to protect our children, so we often don't give them all the information, which is not the best thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the wound thing. I've mentioned the primal wound. What is it? It's a metaphor, right? I mean, your mask is a beautiful metaphor, and I can see from some work I used to do with kids as well. It came to you, something came to you as an insight, like you had a new idea about how to tackle something, and then you saw how that worked, and then it became built into your methodology, and so an insight became practice, right? And that's happened to me working with younger kids, not in a therapeutic setting, but more in like a emotional intelligence workshop in like a group setting in a school. So metaphors, the mask, the wound, and it's a fascination for me. Is like understanding what that wound is, because I asked you what's the mask, why did you come up with that, but what do you see as the wound?
I think for some, as you referenced Nancy Vera's book, The Primal Wound, for some children, the wound is very raw and powerful. The wound of relinquishment, the wound of not feeling loved, of feeling not worthy to be embraced, to be kept, so to speak, to stay, to nurture. For others, it may not be as intensified. There's some adoptees that I've worked with, or adult adoptees that I've met, that never look back, that will say, I don't have any feelings about it. I don't have any, there is no wound. It's very individualized. You can't really, you can't generalize, as you and the audience can't see, every one of the masks behind me every story is so unique, and every adoptees' processing of their story is so very different, so very different.
Yeah, I totally agree with the different stuff, and I was playing around with the wound metaphor myself a couple of weeks ago, and I was thinking, you know, like sometimes, you know, you can cut yourself and then it heals. It just instantly heals. It's very shallow. Sometimes you're going to need to put a sticking plaster on it, a band-aid, what you call, I understand you call them in the States in the band-aid, we call them a elastoplaster or a sticking plaster. Sometimes it's deeper than that, and you're gonna need to go to what you would call ER and what we would call A&E, accident and an emergency. And sometimes they're going to put a bit of glue on it, and sometimes they're gonna need stitches. So there's the kind of the different, that's what we mean in a physical wound. She's using, Nancy Berry was using this metaphor, and my question as I was making sense of that book was what's wounded?
Well, I guess I want to sort of take the word wound and move to loss, because often that's when you describe the different interventions of what we might use if we have a wound. What we find here at C.A.S.E is that many of our children are, you know, grieving a loss, the loss of not being able to be raised by their biological families. And that loss is perceived, experienced, and managed in many different ways. And that's a lot of the work that we do here, is helping them. It goes back to understanding my story, to try to put together what pieces I do have, or how do I, you know, the wound could be that I have no information, that I don't know anything about my early beginnings, that loss, to then moving into, you know, all the other losses that are associated with adoption. You talked about children that may be parented transracially or transculturally, the feeling of being different than others. Loyalty is another stuck spot of, you know, the loss of, in the struggle of alliance between the birth family and the adoptive family. You know, can I love both? Can I have psychological space for both? And often feel tormented or feel disloyal if in fact I do carry somewhere in my heart, in my mind, a connection to my biological family, whether again, known or unknown.
Yeah.
So I kind of see
it, different wounds. Yeah. I think perhaps my own, as a white guy adopted by white parents, you know, my view, you know, that's why we have all the guests on, right? Because it's not the Simon Ben show. It's exploring what the guests have learned, and to bring a richness and a diversity in all senses of the word to the learning experiences that each episode hopefully captures. For me, the what's wounded thing was actually myself. And why I'm bringing it back to that is because it was my sense of identity, my sense of myself. That was what was. So, you know, and a lot of, as I said earlier on, did a webinar on this last month. Identity, who we think we are. We, as adoptees, we think we are broken, or we are unclear on our identity, and I've heard the transracial adoptees on the show expressing the same thing. It's the fit in. So it, to me, underneath our, you know, underneath our behaviors, the feelings that sponsor those behaviors, the thoughts that drive the feelings, that drive the behaviors, it all comes down to identity.
Yeah, I mean, identity is sort of the hub of this wheel when we look at this work. And I think what I'm so honored to have had the opportunity maybe to help mitigate the challenges that you felt or others that have been on the show by being able to help those that have crossed our threshold here at C.A.S.E to work on understanding who they are and their identity. I mean, it's such powerful work, but the opportunity that we're giving to the teens to try to put, as they said, all the pieces together. It's like another metaphor. It's like a puzzle with a missing piece. How do I figure out who I am again, when I don't know where I came from, or I don't have information about the many parts of who I am. And slowly through this therapeutic work, it's putting together a very complex tapestry, is weaving all the threads that we have in trying to help them get a better sense of self. That's the goal of the work, and really looking beneath the mask, some of the things that they may portray with uncertainty or with certainty of integrating all those pieces.
Yeah. So to me, this answers a whole load of questions. And when I say this, I mean the book, because as I said at the outset, it's an incredibly it's an incredibly rich book that's drawn on the insights of you and your colleagues, and it's got case studies in as well. So people I'm a big fan of case studies, because I'm not a theory guy, right? I don't get theory. I say to people, can you give me an example? Because I don't. Part of my, like I did a degree in a management degree, and out of the 18 modules that we did in the 3 years, only one of them had any practical exercises really of any extent, and that was the one that I just loved. The other 17, it was just no. I don't see how understanding economic social history is going to help me become a better business guy, right? So that's part of the inclusion. I was delighted to see the little vignettes, the case studies in the book, because that's putting the theory into context. I believe it, for me personally, it's a huge part of the understanding of the learning journey. So we've got I'm not quite sure where I'm going with the question on this, but I guess where I'm going is you're talking about what you've learned, sharing that understanding, sharing your understanding of having worked with adoptee teams through the book as the thing that is going to catalyze the adoptive parents' own learning journey. Is that what it's about? I mean,
well, I think it's everybody's learning journey. I mean, I think it's the learning journey for the adoptee, and also the adoptive parents' support of the journey. I mean, that's, for the parents listening, sometimes as parents, we well, always as parents, I think that we want to make things right. We want to take away the pain. We want to fix everything for our kids. I always say we're the boo-boo busters. We'll do anything we can, no matter what age, whether they're 5, 15, or, like my son, 30, we try to fix things. And what I want you to hear is that there are things in adoption you can't fix. You cannot fix some of this pain, the loss, the arduous journey of identity exploration in adoption. You can't take away the things that happen. However, it's really critical that your children have all the parts of their story, no matter how challenging they are. Now, certainly, you want to make sure that you're sharing as developmentally appropriate, but we really believe by adolescence that no matter what the story is, that they have the story, and that your job, your role, is to help sit there and support them in the exploration, to be there when there are tears, to be there when there's laughter, to be there when there's this aha, this revelation of understanding why something might be the way it is. But to kind of walk alongside the journey and be present, and not steer away from the difficult questions they ask, or pushing for truths that exist, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm looking at something that I'm doing myself at the moment, something I've got planned. And I was thinking that there's two parts to this. And I love your boo busters. There's two parts to this. There's the understanding part. And then there is a skills part, right? So I'm guessing that when you did your qualifications, you're doing a lot of work, lecture-based stuff, like the understanding stuff, but you're also doing the skills. You're doing the skills part, which is what do you call that in psychology? The placements. I mean, what you're doing you're doing test cases. What do you call that?
You mean how we're learning?
Yeah,
What we're learning.
There's two sorts of learning. Maybe you do some observation. Do you do some observation of other therapists, and then you go on and start doing your own therapy sessions? There's a skills bit to it.
Right. I mean, so here, all of our therapists are trained in a level of what we call adoption competency, of really a very in-depth training that we've created here in the States, that now is accredited and is evidence-based. So in learning the competencies in which to do the work. For myself, as I shared, I am a very seasoned licensed marriage and family therapist, and how I came to this knowledge that I'm sharing with everyone, it's really from the children and families that I worked with. This is not book knowledge. This was not knowledge that I gained in graduate school. In fact, that's why we've developed the national trainings that we have, because what I'm sharing is not learned in our schools of graduate schools or undergraduate. And why I felt a responsibility to take what I had learned from, as you referenced, many of the teens that I wrote about or helped me to write the book, and share it with the world, because it's not information that you're going to learn in a textbook per se.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't ask the right question at all, Debbie. Sorry about that. I think I was trying to. I think I was trying to make a distinction between knowledge and skills.
Yeah.
So the book is all about the knowledge, and and as you rightly say, it's the knowledge that they didn't teach you when you were going through your training. So you're filling that gap. You're hopefully you're sharing your knowledge in that book, and priceless it is. I'm also thinking about the kind of the skills side. So that might be about communication skills, or it may be about kind of coaching skills, or it may be about, you talked about, I think the word you used was expressive therapy, and that was the basis for the thing that you were trying out that became the mask, became the massive. So I guess what I'm asking from that is, what are the, and if I'd had a chance to read the whole book, I'd know this, right? So what are the skills parts that you think are really important? Are they captured to an extent within the book, or are there other things that you could share on the skill side, like the softer stuff, the how-tos, the way that we go about sharing, we go about
Sure.
raising our kids?
Well, I mean, as far as, so I'll try to address it in two parts. One, the book is has integration of a lot of skills that therapists could use, if those are listening besides just parents today, of how you begin to navigate this journey. So I'll just give an example of one, and then we'll talk about something for parents. So we developed called The Game of Discovery, Who Am I? And it's a very interesting board that has on one side characteristics that the adoptee would have gotten from birth family, and then there's characteristics from your adoptive family, and characteristics that sort of just come as to who you are, that you brought to the table. And we have the adoptee take all these different characteristics, and they're all on like little Velcro labels, so to speak, and they begin to think about, where did I get my green eyes? Where did I get my sense of humor? Where does my athletic abilities come from? My religion. They begin to think about all of these characteristics and where did they come from as a way to further discover who I am. Again, this integration, for non-adoptees, our identity, how we navigate this journey is trying to figure out how we're like and different from our parents at the very basics, and you take characteristics, things that you want to be like, things that you don't want to be like, and you kind of put that all together. In adoption, it's much more complex because you, as I said, you have two sets of parents. So that's just one tool that we might have that we'll use therapeutically, whether it's in groups with teens or on a one-to-one. Sometimes we'll even do it with a family, for the family to begin to think about these different characteristics and working with the adoptee. For parents, one of the sort of skills that we might address is telling the story. It seems very simple, but it's very complex. So we'll work with parents and have big like flip charts and markers and have them write out a story that you would tell to a 5-year-old. Then when your child is 9, how will you communicate the story? And then what does it look like when they're 13 or 15? So that's just another example of a skill. You talk about, communication. Again, what are ways that we can help support a family in communicating the story? Learning positive adoption language, learning just language of how you're identifying all the different individuals that are part of their sort of kinship network, and how do we label them? How do we identify who they are? So there's so many different skills and tools, and that's the richness of the work here, that we've created this very unique center that only focuses on these kinds of, issues in this population.
Yeah. How you mentioned the word game. It's the game of the game of discovery. Obviously, expressive arts, the mask. It's a fun way of doing stuff. How important to you is lightness and fun in exploring these issues?
It's critically important. You have to be able to play with the kids, with the teens. You do a spot of the work, and then you might do something that's more enjoyable, playing a game with them, or talking about maybe a recent, athletic event that they participated in, or something they did over the weekend, particularly when we're doing the loss and grief work, because it has to be done. You know, children grieve in spurts. They don't grieve like adults. And so you do a little bit of the work. You know, you used your analogy of I think you called it the glue that you use, or the stitches in a wound. I mean, you know, you have to be very careful how you're going to work on healing, and it takes time. This isn't what we're talking about today. Doesn't happen in a month or two. Some of the young people that I've worked with, you know, I'm working with some that I've worked with for now 10, 15 years to work through a lot of the issues that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How when you think, you mentioned the healing word, how important is vulnerability and sharing our own wounds with kids? How important is that?
I think it's important for children to understand that, you know, we've all lost something along the way, right? And that it's okay to grieve. It's okay to feel the feelings associated with loss. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be angry, because under the anger is the hurt. And I think it's important that children can see that we can heal. The loss will always be there, but how do we manage the loss? You know, we're never asking them to forget those connections that they've had, either known or unknown. That's the important thing. That's the message that I want to give to parents: is you can't erase that. You can't take that away. That's part of the fabric of who they are. And you know, it'll rear its head all different times, you know, at key developmental stages, at life events. Those losses will get re-triggered. But I think, you know, the work that we've been able to do early on sort of sets a foundation in which to hold those feelings over time. And as you said, teach individuals what skills they can use to manage the loss when it presents itself.
Yeah. So one of the favorite phrases, I mentioned it. I don't know how often I mention it on the podcast, but that's hopefully not. Hopefully I don't overcook it. Is something that I heard a while ago, which is the past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. And this idea about, it wasn't in an adoption context, right? So somebody was expressing to me the difference between feedback and feed forward. And I really loved the feed forward one, which is don't tell me what I did wrong, tell me what I could do better next time. So it's like in a coaching thing, but this whole idea that we look forward. So unfortunately, when I was looking for some therapy, I didn't find somebody as good as you, and they kept on. It was like they were very, very focused on what was going on for me at the moment and what had gone on for me in the past. There wasn't a lot of looking forward. There wasn't a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. There wasn't a lot of hope. There wasn't a lot of brightness. And I say quite a lot. I say a lot, that I believe that we should be trauma informed, but hope obsessed, because hope is about the future. Have you got anything? Have you got anything to share on that from your clearly oodles of experience and far more practical how-tos than I have?
So I'm going to share something that I think fits here. I'm going to read you a poem that was written by a young person that I worked with for several years during adolescence. And it was a very challenging period of time. I mean, lots of times kids are coming in here because they're acting out. They may not be going to school. They may be engaging in some kind of promiscuous behavior. They may be internalizing a lot of the things that we talked about today and becoming more depressed, more withdrawn. But I want to read this because I think it really addresses your point, and then we can talk about it. So this was at the end of her therapy. You took on a task complex and confusing, a locked box with no key, the contents a cup with no handle, no way to pour out what was inside, a diary written inside out, no code to decipher the stories. You took me in, a lonely child with no knowledge of her contents, and you gave her a key, a handle, and a code. And now the box is open, the cup poured, and the diary read.
Wow. So I've been talking about metaphors. It sounds like this young lady was very in touch with her metaphors, right?
Yes, yes. So it is the past, the present, and the future. It's all of the above. And I think what she said is, I knew nothing about who I was. I was struggling deeply, but I was given an opportunity to navigate my challenges, my confusion. And I came out in a really positive place, right?
Yeah.
For my future.
Because that's what we hope to do with this podcast, is to shine a light on the positive stuff. And people say, "Oh, you're so positive." I said, "Well, I've been through the darkness, right? I've been a few steps down the trauma hole. My trauma has been way less dark than lots of other people that I've spoken to, and often people will kind of pick me up on that, and no, that's the truth. I haven't been very far down the trauma rabbit hole, and luckily something happened, and I looked around and I could still see the light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm not trying to be positive. I'm just trying to be honest. And there's lots of people out there, especially on social media, trauma dumping, and they're a lot further down. Unfortunately, they've slipped a lot further down the trauma rabbit hole than I went. And if they looked round, unfortunately, they would have a very hard job seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So they unfortunately just keep on going further down, and they also they hang around with people who are at a similar level, seeing a similar level of darkness of them. And my heart goes out to these people, because there has to be light at the end of the tunnel that draws us to it.
Yeah. Well, I believe that there's lots of light, and I've been dedicating my career now for a long time, and every day I do walk into this office, and I see the masks that I showed you, and I know who those young people are, and I know that they've for the most part have weathered the storm, but they've been given an opportunity to sit with the struggles and the challenges and have support. So for parents listening, I hope that you'll reach out for yourselves, and you'll reach out for your children, because it's not often an easy journey. And I've seen so many kids suffer, maybe where they hadn't have to suffer so long if there was reach out to get support, and support from folks that understand the work, understand the issues that we're talking about today. Yeah.
Fantastic. So sorry, I'm not usually lost for words here. In the spirit of reaching out, guys, there is always there are links to C.A.S.E and to Debbie's socials in the episode, in the show notes, what's called the show notes. Every episode that I do includes show notes with links to to help you find out more about what the guest is doing. So check those out, and check out. I'm also going to put a link to Debbie's book on Amazon as well, so you can check that out too. And thank you very much for coming on the show. But before I close off, is there anything else that you'd like to add, Debbie, or ask me, or anything? Just a question that I've not asked that you'd like to.
No, I just want to thank you, and thank the listeners for giving the space to obviously talk about what I think is a very important topic, is adoption and adolescence and the search for identity. And I hope that I gave a little nugget out there, that you walk away, the listeners walk away with something that will further the understanding of the complexities of this journey. So I want to thank you, and thank you, Simon, for your continued commitment to expand knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask you one more question on that subject?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I often hear this question from adoptive parents. Is this an adoption issue, or is this a kid issue? So how do you answer that question when you get or how do you respond to that question? Because in some sense it's a non-question, right?
Yeah. Well, if the audience could see, I'm smiling because I get asked this question all the time. And if I could answer the question simplistically, I probably could retire and I'd be living on some beautiful island somewhere, because there's not a simple answer to the question. And that's where we come in, is really trying to tease out what is adolescence, what is adoption, and how they commingle. And sometimes it really does take the insights of a adoption competent, therapist to help tease that through. It's a really complicated question, and it doesn't, as I said, have simple answers. I think most of the time, believe it or not, and I think the parents are going to be surprised when I say this, is that you're the experts on your kids. Most of the time, you know the answer. Most of the time, I think, when adoption is part of the struggle. I think sometimes it's hard to then what to do about that, and I always say, if there's one internal, sort of fluttering about that, then reach out and get some support around that. Don't sit with it by yourself. And I guess the other thing that I want to say is, please keep the lines of communication open. As hard as it is, because your kids will ask you very challenging questions. And if you're not ready to answer the questions, you can say, I really need to think about this. I want to give it some time, and I promise I'll get back to you. Or now's not the greatest time, but let's later this evening, come back to the kitchen and we'll talk about this. Because a lot of the kids that I've worked with have said, I brought this up to my parents and they never wanted to talk about it.
I guess there's a difference between theory and practice, right? So for me, it's like, it doesn't, well, let me ask you another question. To what extent does knowing whether it's an adoption issue or a kid issue help?
From the parents' lens?
Mm-hmm.
It's not critical, because you may not know, and that's why you're seeking support. Something's amiss, something's not right. I mean, that's when that question pops in your mind, your teen is presenting something that's letting you know there's an issue going on, right? They're struggling somehow. And then you begin to say, well, this just might be normal adolescence. I had a difficult adolescence. I didn't want to hang out with my parents, or I was withdrawn, or I was irritable, or I cried a lot. but it's important that you also add the adoption lens in there to be thinking about, it makes it more challenging, as we've been talking about today, right? So it could be, particularly if they're beginning to ask some questions around their adoption story, that then they're giving you some clues, right? They might say something, out of anger, they may pose a question, but that's letting you know that they're kind of testing the waters too, because remember I said they're uncertain about how you're going to receive questions or thoughts or feelings around adoption, because they're fearful that the parent will interpret this as being ungrateful or disloyal, right? That they're afraid to bring it up because they're afraid that the parent's going to think that the child doesn't love them if they're thinking about their birth parent or something to do with their story. So they're very reticent to broach it with the parent. And then if they then see the parent being uncomfortable, then there's the message back to them, hey, this is not a good place to go. It's off topic. And so they may internalize what's going on with them. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And for me, I think as I was listening to you, I was thinking it's actually more important to address the issue than it is to figure out whether it is or whether it isn't, because doing something about it is more important.
Right. Yeah. Like to be there, to be present, to be available. So that's why I'm hoping, look, I encourage parents to read the book. Again, it's there to spread the knowledge that you will gain deep insights to what teens think and feel at this time in their life that will give you some understanding in which to move from within your family.
Yeah. And in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be sitting on a beach, and it's the only time I actually read. So I'm going to be. I just got my Kindle. My wife, I bought a Kindle years ago. And my wife lost it, so I lent it to her. She lost it, so I bought a new one. And I'm going to be diving into the book myself. So thank you very much for coming on the show, Debbie, and we'll speak to you very soon.
Thanks. Welcome to come back again after you read the book.
Yeah, good. Will do. Thanks a lot, listeners, and we'll speak to you very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.